you know what? I've been actually looking into the mainstream more to get insight. That's how I found that last video that we are just talking about how I showed the example of the mud flood. And I was watching that video just to write notes about what the mainstream timeline is that we're given, right? Because this is a book we can use for reference. The handy now this shows off from the classical, or from actually the Stone Age to the Bronze Age, the Classical Age, and all that. So I have to go through that to try, so we can have reference to try to get this hazy timeline, because it's confusing. Now, did they add time, or was it taken away? And with what you did about how that the one might look like an eye, this is a big one.
So yeah, the story is that 1,000 years has been added to the timeline, and that's the time that we know as the Dark Ages. And when you look into the Dark Ages, pretty much nothing happened. And so where this comes from is there's a Russian mathematician called Anatoly Fomenko, and he was basically looking into solar phenomenon. So he was looking into like eclipses, the sun, solstices, things like this. And he was trying to map them out chronologically. And when he looked at them, he worked out that the dates that were written that these, eclipses or whatever were supposed to happen. Now, because we have computer programs and they can go back and see the sky at an exact date in the past. So he was checking them all, and he found that none of them lined up. So he was basically looking, and in a book it'd say, on this date there was a solar eclipse, and he'd run his program, go to the date, and there was no solar eclipse. So he started looking into it, and through lots and lots of research, he worked out that when he took 1,000 years off, it all matched up. It all fell into place again. So 1,000 years has been added, and what it was is the Jesuits, Joseph Scaliger, and he did what's known as Scaligerian chronology. Where basically he was, they had all the religious books that were all written in Latin, and they were transcribing them into, Italian and into the modern languages. And so when they were doing that, they basically, all the dates had an I or a J in front of them. So it was, the I stands for Iusa, and this J stands for Jesus. Iusa is just the Greek way of writing Jesus, I think. And basically, so all the dates were written as like the year 100, but in the year of our Lord. So it would be J500. And then when Joseph Scaliger and all his monks went through the books, they changed all those I's and J's to ones, and that effectively added 1,000 years to the timeline.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's the story. And I guess the question is, was that done on purpose, or was it a mistake? And, when you start to look into it, people would say, why would you add 1,000 years to the timeline? That's just silly. But what it does is it gives the people who have rewritten history, it gives them 1,000 more years to write their story. So they now have 1,000. Yeah, exactly. They've got a bigger gap from where we are, so they can put in a more story to try and explain all this stuff that we see around us that is unexplainable in the current narrative.
It's analogous to trying to move around, trying to change your shirt in a closet in a small space. You got more room to work around. You got more fluff. For a direct example, if you got more room to work with or time to work with, it's easier for you to move around and operate, right? Now, a good figure in history, this is good for people who have the history background, like watch a History Channel. But like for me, and I'm sure obviously for you, example, like loving the History and Discovery Channel, I remember this, like you just referenced those monks who transcribed the classics and all that to English, to the spelling language. A very prominent figure in history, one of those monks was called the Venerable Bede, Beade, and he was a monk in England, and he was one of the most prominent monks that was responsible for transcribing those old classics into English. And that sticks out for me too. And also another thing from that people that used to watch the History Channel might liken the adding time to, or going back and seeing how things transgress over time. They used to have an example, I remember, on History Channel or Discovery Channel about how the Big Dipper would look over 1,000 years and how it would change. So if Anatoly Fomenko does that with computer graphics, it's a good example to show you how they used to do that with their astronomy and how they were trying to sell that, because they would show you a picture of the Big Dipper, how it looked 100 or maybe 100 million years ago, and how over time it would just change because of the way the stars move, allegedly. So that's a good example how to draw back to what we come from the History and Discovery Channel information that they sold to us.
Exactly, and this is the thing. It's been going on for a long, long time, because if you think about it, back in the day when this was all happening, they kept language from the people. So the common person couldn't read or write, and it's because it was kept from them. They weren't educated in that. So what did they do? They kept all that knowledge and they wrote all the books. So at that time, they were writing all the history that we now see, or all the stories that we are now told is history. And when they were doing it, they did it, in a time where no one could interpret or see what they were doing, because they could literally stand up with a book and say whatever they wanted, because no one could read it. No one was literate back then. So we did go through this period of, 100 or 200 years after the, deluge or whatever. When people just didn't have the language, and they were changing the languages as well. As we know, they changed it from Latin, to Roman, and they keep changing the language. So this is what they do. They rewrite it, and they can keep telling the people, sort of that the history is still the same as they think it is, and change it a little bit. But in the books, they're writing a completely different story, because they're writing it for people who live 100 years in the future. This is how they think. They don't do things, for next year. They do things for 3 generations ahead. And when you look at it like that, everything that we look at, every book, someone's written it. This is the thing. And we all know how hard it is to get a book published. You've got to go to these big companies, and a publisher's got to say, yes, I'll publish that. So we only get certain information. We're far from a free society as far as information. We just get, what we get is an interpretation of the false story that we were given. And yeah.
The languages seem to be a big deal, like you were citing, and I think it has merit in talking about that, because how they had languages, because different languages offer different perspective. And you think of Latin, and you think of Spanish and French. Like Spanish and French are like the Romance languages and the language of poetry. German is like a mechanical for building. English, I think, is for that reason. They made English to be like a spellcraft language of confusion, right? Where it's easy because of the duality in it, like words like whole and WHOLE and whole HOLE sound exactly the same but mean 2 entirely different things. Your spirit can be whole, but a whole can be empty. That's a duality. It's like spelling. When we say his story, it's like spelling. Now Latin, I think, and that's one of the reasons why I think that they're trying to get kids away from doing cursive, because AI can't read cursive. And also stemming off that, and how it's easy to hide and confuse things in the change of language and lexicon. Latin, I think they're getting people, they got people away from Latin a very long time ago, because Latin, now think about, like I just said, about French and Spanish being the Romance languages of poetry, German being mechanical, English being possibly like literally spellcraft. Latin, it was hard to lie in Latin, from what I've studied and stuff, because it gave both female and male also context of time. So to speak in Latin was almost like to speak straight up truth. And when you get down to all the generations and lineage of lexicon down to English, we think of it now as like a language of spellcraft and how they like to play with the words. And we want to say phonetics, phonetics, the way things sound. It all kind of swirls back to the research that we do with this reset stuff, and it's all related. And the language thing is very important too. Like you just said, And to distinguish between them and to identify characteristics, I think English is a language of lies and confusion and spellcraft. A part of me thinks that for that very reason, like you said, to confuse, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it becomes pretty apparent, when you look into English that we don't have enough words. We don't have enough words to describe what we want to say. It's not a full language. It's incomplete. And what it is it's a trade language. Basically, it's the Phoenician maritime trade language. So everything is based on trade and maritime law and maritime trade. That's what our language is. So English came about. Basically, it was like a pidgin language. You know how we have pidgin languages. And what it was is that these Phoenicians could sail around the world and go into different ports that spoke different languages, but they could communicate with this pidgin English, which was a trade language. And that eventually became English, which is the language we've got, which also accounts for the fact that English is just peppered with all these other other words from other languages. We've got French words and, Italian, and, we've got words from everywhere because it's a trade language. It's this dead language. It's for maritime law, for dead entities. That's why there's no life in it and no expression, and it doesn't. If you try and write poetically, and really explain things, there's a lot of shortcomings in English because it's just not developed for that. That's why, again, we have to grab. Yeah, and we have to grab words from other languages to sound clever. That's the thing. So yeah, and just on phony. Another thing that I was just picked up when you were saying that, Phoenicians. We get phony from that, obviously phony, which is PHON, but it's also the same as faux, FAUX, which also means the exact same thing, doesn't it? Phony, fake.
Yep, and the duality thing too, with whole and whole. You can be whole in spirit, and there is an empty hole, HOLE. Okay, it's
Yep.
At face value, some people can be like, "What are you talking about?" But yeah, it's for a reason. It's a tactic. It's a tactic.
Yeah, and they join words too, like history. His story, and mistake, mistake. Breakfast, break, fast.
Mortgage.
Christmas, Christ, mass.
Mortgage.
Mortgage. Yeah.
A death grip.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to buy a house? Here goes your death grip.
Exactly. And so when you join words together, again, they change the meaning. And so we say, and this is the spellcraft. They get us to be saying these spells. We don't know what they are.
It makes me think of the word
that means something different.
That John Levi was just citing in the book. The law book, the penal code, because it is based off of a dead entity, effectively. When you are cut from the slip of from your mother of the natural world, that's how they operate, literally. And it reminds me of Tom Barnett. I'm not sure you said that you're familiar with him. He goes into this stuff a lot, and he's really good with the legalese and being aware of not only their law, their maritime law, but your natural law. He's worth looking into. He's one of your compatriots too.
Definitely.
Down under.
He is, yes, yeah. He's New South Wales. Yeah, he's great on lots of topics, old Tom. So yeah, definitely go check him out, guys. And this is the thing, like with the languages. Yeah, we've been taught to talk as dead entities, and everything in the language, like it's all got double meaning, like current and currency. It's water, right? Water current, but it's also electricity. But then currency is money. So we have these things where we've got three different meanings, but they're all actually the same, right? Because they're all things that flow. Currents and currency and all this, and like bank. Bank, river banks, right? That's where all the stuff collects. and banks, right? That's where they collect all the money, and it all comes, down from, pirates and, sunken treasure and all this kind of stuff. But yeah, everything in our language is being changed so that, and also changed so that we don't understand the past. We can't read. I mean, I can't read Latin, so there's so many old books that I can't read. You go past you get Old English back to sort of, you do find it in the sort of 1500s, but you're struggling to find anything that's easy to read past then. But most of it, that's like, they're few and far between. Most of it's in Latin and languages that are dead. And you find lots of these books as well are written in like multiple languages. They seem to switch. They seem to be written in Italian and French and Danish or something, all in one book, and they kind of mix stuff up. So, I think back in the day, people were speaking lots of languages, and just think of how that would turn your right brain on, because the right language is the right brain, right? And that's creativity, and that's intuition and thoughts and ideas and going forward. And obviously that was the old world, but this new world, they knocked down all those buildings that were creative and turned them into cubes, which is like your left brain. They just want to box us in, right? They want to put everything in a box and define it and say, no, it means this, it means this, it means this. Here's your book, go read that. This is what your history is. And so this is it's the whole thing. It's like which sort of shows you this isn't just a physical thing of people trying to take over. It's energy, because everything's interrelated. Like everything's like so interrelated. The language, how it affects, like everything. That we're not just dealing with a group of psychopaths. I don't think it's much more going on here. Like they're literally changing the course of human evolution.
Trying to. We're trying to we're a force against it. I think that there's just I'll go back to what I was thinking, but you know what? The fact that they're using words that this community's been using, whatever, it lends to that now. Like we've talked about this before, the fact that they'll take something that's being used or whatever, like, because we never heard, at least politically, the term reset being used. You guys have been talking about it for 5 years, this community. So, yeah. Now, what I think that we've just been nailing. What I think that. Go ahead.
So I was going to say another one is narrative. I'd never really heard that out in the common speech, and that's suddenly everywhere. Everyone's saying the narrative. It's like that's what we used to use. The mainstream narrative, the common, and it's everywhere now. It's like we're probably years ahead of something.
Dude, it's like the Eye of Sauron. It's like searching for, and it's like kind of like focused on our truth community right now, man. And it's actually like, I almost think that it's like like changing the internet as we look for things, dude. Because you know what, that's definitely capable, But at a certain level, they got to keep the truth out there. So going back to the timeline, though, Cam, I think that what we were nailing down for people in their plight into this, we were just nailing down the how they can do it. Okay, like how it can be done with the confusion of language, and how we can't read certain books, like you just said. But the why is a, I guess, the underlying question, right? And that's the big one. That's one that's intimidating for me, But like it fits in with their MO. But I think that we can begin to see with the changing, or with the different languages and everything, how they can extend the time, and or make it seem like there's extended time with that I thing. But it's like, what's the intent? I guess now is like, what do you? I guess that was a good segue, talking about the Phoenicians and everything. What's their intent with that? Like, obviously to confuse us and not have us on the same page. But what is that? It seems like you just said it like spiritual thing, but like, what really is the main aim of it, man? I don't. Just to confuse.
It's
degrade the human being.
Yeah, it's to cut us from our past. Is that the right word? So it's to detach us from our story, so that we don't think that we were the people who created all this stuff. And it was so far back in the past that it was a different civilization, and they had different stuff that this is the thing. It's like when you look at the pyramids, and they the pyramids are thousands and thousands, and all you can really do is look at it with wonder. It's like, oh, how did they do that? Because it's so far back that you won't connect that to any technology of today. And that also goes back into the story of mainstream that's been happening to us, that we were monkeys and then dudes in caves and all this kind of crap. But yeah, so it detaches, and it also detaches their civilization from ours. So we look at it as it's got to be something different. But when we look at these buildings, clearly these were people who wanted what we want. They wanted beauty. They wanted nice functional buildings that didn't break, that stood the test of time, that had free energy, that were heated, that looked after themselves. And that's what they wanted. And that's the same stuff people want today. But they want to tell us that, that wasn't us. That wasn't you guys. You couldn't create that. That was thousands of years. It was all done so long ago. And then with what they also do is they pull things forward. So with the cathedrals and all this kind of stuff, as far as we can work out, they're all, sort of at least 1,000 to 800, pretty much got to be. But they tell us they're all 200 years old.
No way.
And so basically they do that because now it's just a building. Now it's just a church. Now it's just a post office or a capitol building or an insane asylum, right? Because these were built in times where there was no electricity, where there was no technology. So there couldn't be any technology in these buildings, could there? Because there was no technology, right? And so they just jumble up the time, and so that we can't perceive the timeline. We can't put it together sequentially. Until you start looking at it, and then you realize, hang on, this is really, really jumbled up. And then also there's obviously the time factor. So everything they do has got all these multiple facets, which is why, it's, we're dealing with a big group of people and, a multi sort of consciousness. This isn't, one mad dude sitting in a castle. This is like you said, it's got to be spiritual, because we're talking, thousands of years, these plans, like millennia, literally. And so when they add that 1,000 years, then they can add all these stories, oh, there was this civilization and it survived, it only lived for 800 years, but it built this, this, and this. And really, and it's just melted buildings that were just really, red brick buildings that they got torched and they look a bit different. And they say, no, that's a different civilization. And, they were there and they built that. But the problem is, when you look around the world, you see there's star forts everywhere. They're all the same. There's capitol buildings everywhere. They're all the same. All these buildings, cathedrals, churches, they're all the same. So they've got in there, tried to add all this time, tried to mess up the timeline, make us think that it's not us, that it's in the past, that the technology. And that's the main thing, isn't it? The timeline. They tell us, there was nothing, no technology at all until the 1800s, pretty much, maybe the Industrial Revolution.
1800s Industrial Revolution time period, where all the inventions start rolling out. Yep.
I think that's kind of their biggest mistake, is because clearly when you start looking at this, you see these buildings needed technology to be built. And I think, and this is the thing, because they just keep pushing narratives. They never change it. They just keep pushing and pushing, like, because it used to work in the past, they think it'll work in the future. The song remains the same and all that kind of stuff. So, I just think that they thought if they just took over the education system, all the books, and just told people, no, this is definitely the story. It could never be any different. There was no technology. You came from a monkey, that people wouldn't question it. And who knows, maybe 2020 was always in their visions as this year for their takeover, and they just didn't have us. They didn't have the population, as programmed as they thought they would. And they've had to roll on with their plans for some reason, and it seems to all be falling apart, which is awesome.
I think I know what you're.
Watch.
I think I know what you're hinting at. They didn't account for us, Cam.
Yeah, exactly. Like the anomaly.
Especially also the internet too. Like you said, it got away from them, but that's their biggest mistake. I think that the internet got away from them a little bit too. Maybe they were trying to. They still do with their censorship and what we were talking about with the YouTube, but look at what we're doing now, sharing information across the realm, right? So at a certain level, they lost it, or maybe it's just how it operates, and that's how truth operates. That it has to become out, like how we talk about it's truth in theater, whatever. Maybe it's honestly, maybe it's not even a tactic of theirs. Maybe it's just actually it is, because you can tell sometimes that they're purposely putting the truth out there. But I think also some of it, the truth just comes out naturally, right? Whether it's intended or not, it's just a way. It's just a way of the aether, you know. But yeah, it seems like that's a good point, Cam. Like that is kind of like one of the main tells is like for them to say that those buildings that we're researching are built 200 years ago, and the tech and everything. Because when you guys talk about like the horse and the buggy thing, it doesn't add. It literally doesn't add up. That it's so despair. It's so crazy to think about that they would have the whereabouts to build these kind of structures. For example, I always go back to the 17-foot thick walls of the Philadelphia City Hall, doing that with horse and buggy. And yeah, people are starting to question it more now because we have access, I think, to it. But before, back in the day, and you hinted at this earlier, the bottleneck of academia was way more stringent, right? And way more tight because they were able to control it way more. So they were able to whitewash everything and smudge everything more right now. But now it's kind of coming, and maybe it does lend credence to the 2020 is 2020 vision type of deal. Can't hide everything, and rivers are always flowing and revealing new land and new earth, right? So, and that's always going to be evidence to see. Or, for example, buildings right outside my door or in my city. I think Buffalo could possibly be it seriously looks like an old ancient Tartarian mega hub, honestly. All these buildings all over the place in the water with the Niagara River and the current and the flow, how they can manipulate it, and it looks like it was manipulated. Yeah, it's all encompassing.
And this is the thing, the facade, they love their facades. That's all they do, isn't it? They don't create anything. They just steal it and change the way it looks, and they do it with, this is their plan. They do it with the buildings. I mean, you think about it, the actual deluge, the actual mud, that was a huge facade, right? That covered everything up and made it look different. Then they do it to the actual individual buildings. They change the books, the language, the art, the education system. They just change everything, and only by 5%, only a little bit, and they just tell you it's got a different meaning, and that's their plan. And that's why they have to control the education system, the media. They have to control the information that's coming at you. If they don't do that, they're stuffed. And it's like you said, that's what the internet did. That got away from them because suddenly people, they probably thought we were all just going to get on there and share cat videos and stuff, which a lot of people do. But I don't think they, I don't think they, I don't think their plans. I don't think that they thought people would start getting on there and sharing information and piecing together what the real story is. I just think that they thought that I think they thought that everyone was stupid. They didn't account for the anomaly.
That kind of,
maybe it is just all show, and this is just the end of Act 3 or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? I think so. So it kind of lends credence to the idea. We always say they and stuff like that, and we kind of refer to them as possibly. I think this is a good distinguishing point here, and I laid this down a little bit in one of my videos previously, and maybe I spoke to you about this. I forget. But what we're seeing as like what we'd say the cabal is, or the NWO, And we always say government, government. I think that there will always be a government, and I think that we're misinterpreting the NWO cabal as a government. I think it's actually just a hidden hand. It's like it's a religion. It's the Phoenician religion. I think, and we're at least me myself, and I had this ignorance back in the day when I was fledgling into this way back in the day, and I applied it to all government, like F government type of deal, and I didn't have the discernment then to be like, no, there's always the good and bad, and I and the government will always be there. I think there always has to be a government, whether it's a benevolent kingdom or a tyranny or whatever. It's just a slow moving, lumbering leviathan that picks up people that can't keep on going, right? What we're seeing as this NWO cabal, it's a religion idea that stems from back in the day, and that could be the nexus of the whole why, right? Because it's effectively them trying to protect their religion, and you can look up what the Phoenicians did for their religion. The people who are watching this, at your own discretion, I would advise. But yeah, I believe that what we're seeing and identify maybe as the one world government or whatever, I think that's a misnomer or even a red herring, and they would like that, right? Because then they're kind of hidden then, right? Now, with the internet thing, and I've had this notion too. This is kind of a positive glass half full outlook. With the internet getting away and how we're able to do this, it seems like they may have lost some kind of control. Now, to extrapolate on that a little bit, maybe they lost control, like entirely. And this is like what we're seeing right now, what we're all in the midst of now, all of us and the whole entire, like literally, it's the gravity of this is so strong. I shouldn't even use that word, but maybe this is just like a death blossom, and we're watching the dust settle of that cabal, of that former religion that had taken place throughout, it seeded everything in this realm. The facade of that maybe, or a foundation of that may have cracked, because we're able to talk about this kind of stuff. And I've had this notion for a while that maybe they lost sway. Who gained sway? I don't know. Is it benevolent? I don't know. But look at what we're doing, Cam. Look at what we're talking about. Look at what we're studying. We have the ability to it. There's a love-hate relationship. Yes, YouTube sucks in the fact that there's censorship, but I can still make my videos and post it on there. People can see it. We're communicating via the internet right now. So did it get away from them? Did they actually lose sway? Is their time up? Because they talk about this in their theater, truth drop in theater. They talk about it in their movies. I like to put clips up of things I think are truth drops that they're referring to in reality, like Disney truth drops. And when a vampire says, this might be a little bit out there, but like when a vampire in a movie says, we've been feeding on you for 400 years. Now I'm watching a movie with my wife. I'm like, that's a truth drop. That's a truth drop. Look, they've been in power for 400 years. It's up now. And my wife's like, shut up, watch the movie. But there's merit in that, I think, because it's a part of their MO to lay down the truth in theater. And when I say theater, I mean film, I mean music, I mean games. So that's kind of like a grand kahuna, a big swath of how I think of it a little bit. We're misinterpreting it as a government. We have to distinguish that it's actually kind of an idea of a religion that we think, and maybe they did lose sway. And this is all just a death blossom, I hope. Glass half full. What do you think?
Or did they really win? Yeah, so if you look into like the Vedic culture, which is, pretty much the Vedic culture is the same as old Tartarian culture. They're the same thing. So that culture with their government, they had like a caste system, but it was, we think of that as a bad thing. And they basically had like, I guess, manual workers, and then more sort of thinkers and scribes, then their government. And then above the government, they had their spiritual leaders. So
Clergy.
The government always, yeah, exactly. There was always a buffer, there was always people ethical people watching the government, and they could always say no to anything. So they basically kept the government in line, so the people didn't have to. And so they were, what we would call, the religious class. And obviously what's happened at some point is that class has been infiltrated by, as you say, people with different beliefs. Okay, and because these religious people basically, controlled the governments, they kept them in check. Why would you take over the government, right? You'd take over the priesthood, wouldn't you? You'd infiltrate that, so then you get to tell the government what to do. So I think this is what's happened. And then we have the proof of this with, the Jesuits. They're a priest class. We know they went around the world infiltrating governments. I call them the whisperers, because they went and got into kings and queens, and they'd whisper in their ears, and they'd be telling them, oh, your neighbours hate you, and telling them all these lies. Oh yeah, we have to start a war. And through that, yeah. And then they just take control. They'd weaken the things, and they say, oh, we'll give you a loan to get you out, and then they'd end up owning them. And this is how they did it. This is how they took over. It wasn't through war. It was through lies and subjugation, and they still do it today with countries. They go in, they have a war, they blow the crap out of the country, then they come in, they go, oh, no worries, we'll lend you the money to rebuild. And the countries take the loan, right? And as soon as they take that loan from the World Bank, they're owned, they're stuffed. And so that's how they take over countries. And this is what they were doing a long time ago. So, but I think when that happened, I think that the good priest class, wasn't wiped out. It's still around, and it's always been around, and it's always had an influence. It's just that we've been in a time where, evil or bad or dark, whatever you want to call it, it's had more than 50% influence. And I think where we're going now is we're tipping the scales back, so it's going to be more good. So I don't think we're going to get rid of bad. It's just going to be, it's going to be a lot more recognizable, and so it won't be allowed, to rise up as it has been in the last couple of 100 years.
Excellent point. Yeah, and I think people are having the gift of sight now too, the insight of that, and being able to see it now more, literally, and maybe I'll say this too, I'll put it out there. It's not any one person that's going to make that happen politically. We can have our opinions on to get back into the political realm, I guess, but it starts with the individual person, and it seems that the individual person's spirit, I don't know if you get a sense for it, but it seems like people call it or refer to it as the Great Awakening or the Ascension. It all does seem to coalesce around that. Like everyone's awareness seems to be rising spiritually. It seems like a really good thing. So yeah, a lot of factors are taken into account to make that assessment of seems there's a lot of real crazy shite going on right now, for sure. But again, I always use this analogy that light ahead in the tunnel that we're all in together. In my most humblest of humble opinions, isn't a freight train approaching. It's the end of the tunnel. It's daylight. It's beautiful daylight. And we all have to keep moving towards it. And it's not any one person outside of your sphere of influence that's going to enact that or manifest it. It's within you. Okay. Lead by example. Okay. And this is what they were trying to take from us. Okay. For a couple hundred years. Seems that leverage may be coming back a little bit in our way, benevolently. So yeah, it starts with the individual and the intent of the human being, the living human being, because we are light beings. I don't think that we're star dust. I think star power is within us. The light power is within us. That's the flip that those theoretical physicists like to use. We're stardust. No, you can think that, but I don't. Ladle's half full.
Yeah, and that goes a lot. That's the whole, you're just a random speck kind of thing, you're nothing special. And just to finish off with this 1,000 years, just as a bit of a time frame, the way that we're looking at it is it looks like about 500 years ago is when they actually changed the dates. And so it changed it from 500 years behind them. And obviously, yeah, so around the sort of 1500s is when it was all done. And with this whole 1,000 years, you may look at it as a bad thing. Oh, how weird, it's a bad thing. They've added all this time. They've changed the story. But when you think about it, they've given us this story that we've been these warring people, you know, running around and in poverty and destroying the earth for thousands of years. But it looks like the truth is it's only been happening a couple of hundred years, and it's because it's been imposed on us. So this stuff, you know, we're a lot closer to these people who are living this way in peace, you know, with the world, making it, you know, a good place for everyone. That's a lot closer than we've been told. So it's going to be a lot easier to get that back than if we were, you know, 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years away from it. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing. All that good stuff it's not that far away from us, and so it's yeah, definitely something that we can understand and rebuild and start to bring back to our experience.
Look forward to.
Definitely. I mean, just as one last thing, we talked about the Stone Age and the Copper Age. Maybe the Stone Age is when they built all these stone structures, and the Copper Age was when they started using all the Antiquitech and the copper domes.
And then the Steel Age is what
change the story, don't they?
Yeah, and then the Steel Age is when they stole it. The Steel Age is when the robber baron stole it.
Yeah, exactly.
They tell you. They tell you.
That's the mining.
Hey, you know what, too, Campbell?
Let
me lay this down. Yeah. So I'll tell you what. I just did a recent one on the Ottoman Empire, man, and the Turks. And I'll tell you what, like you said about the Vedics and the Indians, even the Orient and the Asian, they were like it too. And I think that also a major grapple on the Middle Eastern man bad is because they were like that too. The old Ottomans. I think I put it down in my last video. I think that's why the aristocracy of Europe went at the Turks in World War I, and they say, Gavrilo Princip, they went at them because of that, because they were based, I think, and they completely grappled that whole the Middle East too, because the Ottomans seem to have got it too. They seem that, like, just like you explained about the Vedics, I think that culture was like that as well. Different sectors of the Tartaria, you know, empire.
And this is the thing. I must have taken them a while to get through them, because it all started with the Crusades. Like the Crusades, you're looking at the Crusades, that was literally the people from England and France, you know, the usurpers, going to the Middle East and stealing all their tech. Like they stole telescopes, that all came from there, you know, all the art, all the different, you know, so many things came. They just went and they stole it all, they trashed everything they could. And that was literally, like we were just talking about, that was literally this evil religion coming in and taking over a good one.
Exactly.
And destroying it, yeah.
And now we find ourselves here. I'm in my basement in Buffalo, and I'm talking to you in Perth, Australia. And all's well that ends well. It all comes back full circle, and we always try to keep that positive glass half full, light at the end of the tunnel type of look at it, because it's dark a little bit, and it could be a little foreboding, okay, to see what can possibly be manifested here. But actually, it inspires me now that I've come full circle on that, and just what we've talked about. We have the ability to connect. Something's going on here. It seems positive. It seems benevolent. So have a glass half full outlook, and that kind of manifests your reality.
Definitely.
It really does help. It's a vibration.
Definitely. It's clearly been done before. They've built a perfect, you know, heaven on earth. So yeah, I think it's time we started the construction process again.
Amen to that.
Alrighty. Okay, guys, so I hope you like that one. A bit of a delve into, the 1,000 years that was added to our timeline, and some reasons possibly why it was done. And so if you've got any questions about that, please leave it in the comments, or Beserker will cut your head off. Give us a like, a subscribe. Also, I'll leave the link to Beserker Bear's channel in the description, so make sure you go over there, give him a subscribe, a like, and show him some love. And of course, share this content around if you find it interesting. All right, so thanks for spending some time with us, guys. Having a more awesome day, and we'll talk to you all on the next upload. Bye for now.
Take care.